Yeah, I'm Delta Agent, as the project coordinator for the Black Health Matters project at the Love Tank. Similarly to Mark, I'm very excited to be here and discuss this topic with you all. I have a history of multiple different mental health issues, including anxiety, depression, and psychosis. And over the years, I've done like a lot of, not only in my own journey, like improve my own mental health, but then I've also worked with other organizations around mental health improvement and raising awareness of mental health issues. So it's a topic that I'm really passionate about. I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Thank you, Mark and Dale. Thank you for being here. And so I think we can start with maybe if you can tell us a bit more about your own mental health experiences and how you engage with services, if you have.
Yeah, should I kick off now?
Yeah, you go.
Cool. So I think I want to take you right back a little bit. So my first experience of mental ill health was my father, my dad, a Jamaican man, born in Jamaica, came here in the mid-60s and suffered from epilepsy, which obviously isn't a mental health condition, but in the early 80s had a quite serious breakdown. And as a family, we didn't talk about it. He had some help at the Maudsley Hospital, but that was it. He didn't engage in any mental health services. We didn't discuss it as a family, and it didn't go any further than that. And that experience marked my dad for the rest of his life. And he continued to suffer from mental ill health for the next 10 to 15 years, but never had it formally diagnosed and never engaged in any kind of therapy or treatment at all. And I think that was really telling for his generation. Many people who had come here and migrated in the 50s and 60s had to deal with the racism they faced here, their disconnect from home in the Caribbean and settling into a new country, alongside his own kind of interpersonal and family issues. So that was my first live experience of what it meant to be a Black man experiencing quite severe mental health problems and also being taken to a mental health institution. My own experience probably began in the mid-80s, when not long after I was diagnosed HIV positive in 1986. And as a young man, as you can imagine, dealing with a diagnosis at the very, very early days in the heart of the epidemic, I was struggling and I didn't know who to go to or who to turn to. But I was very, very fortunate that at that time, services were popping up in the community-based services to access counselling. So I sought out support at a service centre for the Landmark, and I had quite basic counselling with a therapist over about an 18-month period. And that really, really whet my appetite. I like to talk, as anybody that knows me will tell you. And I have no problem with talking about my feelings. And I think that came from the experience of seeing my dad not talk about his feelings and the detrimental effect that that had on him. So subsequently, I have dipped in and out of therapy, usually community-based, usually with a therapist within our community. And again, usually a therapist that comes from the LGBT community, which was really, really important to me. But over my journey, as I've dipped in and out of that kind of therapeutic service, I've actually gone on quite a path with it. So I've gone from quite formal intensive counselling to group work, right over to engaging in life coaching, which is where I'm at now. So I kind of utilize that in a different way because I'm in a really different space in my life and my journey, but I've really benefited from that. But I've also recognized in my community of other Black men that many of the problems that we face and therefore we pass on to each other are a result of us not having the ability to talk to people. Now, one of the things I have struggled with over the years when I've wanted to dip into therapy is finding a therapist who is also Black and queer. Initially, that wasn't a challenge for me and I wasn't completely too concerned about that. But as time has gone on, that has become an issue for me. And going forward in the future, as I get older, I would want a therapist that could understand my journey and understand my background. But overall, I've really found therapeutic services to be a real benefit to me. And I do try to constantly push those to other Black men who I'm engaging with, and have spent a lot of time working with Black therapists that I know to bring other clients into the room for them as well. That's my journey in a nutshell.
So in terms of my journey with mental health services, it kind of started similar to Mark with another family member before it began with me. So I lived with my grandma during my secondary school years, and she developed dementia after a stroke. And we as a family started like having family therapy sessions to like deal with all the changes that were coming about as my grandma's health was deteriorating. And that was a really poor experience to say the least, because although I was interested in engaging with it, the rest of the family weren't, I suppose, word escapes me, but they weren't willing to like properly engage with the service. So it was a very difficult space to be in. Often it was just a lot of explosive arguments about how we were navigating my grandma's deteriorating health and stuff. And then beyond that, when it came to my more individual like engagement with mental health services, it was the following year when I was living in a youth hostel, and I had like some huge transitions happening in my life. My grandma going to a care home. I had recently become homeless and was living in a youth hostel. And I was going to a counselor at the time to kind of process all these massive life changes happening in one go, because it all happened in the space of a few months. I think I had about 12 sessions with that counselor, and it was helpful in, I suppose, processing where I was at that point in my life. But it really didn't address a lot of the, I suppose, underlying traumas that were festering because of my grandma's deteriorating health and stuff and all the issues that came around there. Later that year, I was seeing a school counselor. I was in sixth form. I was speaking to a school counselor again. I started to notice my mental health was deteriorating. I was often quite anxious or depressed. I was really struggling to engage with my sixth form work and stuff like that. That counselor was actually a Black Jamaican man, and same background as me. And he had also lived with his grandma and cared for his grandma as her health deteriorated when he was younger. So we can relate directly to like our experiences about like what it was like to be raised by a grandparent and stuff. So I found that really, really helpful in terms of, I suppose, being able to talk about my experience, but not having to like, I suppose, teach the person who I'm working with about my experience. So I could spend the time actually just talking about what I'm going through rather than having to explain the ins and outs of the dynamics of that kind of like family relationship and stuff. That was really good. But again, it kind of touched one aspect of the things I was going through, but wasn't addressing, I suppose, the underlying issues and really getting to the root of the problem. So I think the beginning of 2016, I started to see like serious declines in both my mental and physical health. I experienced like what they called it, a chronic tension headache. And this was associated with the constant anxiety I was experiencing at the time. And shortly after, I started to experience hallucinations, delusions, and I was diagnosed with anxiety disorder, and my symptoms were described as attenuated psychosis. So psychotic symptoms before you get the more formal diagnosis of like a bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. And I experienced that for, I think, about most of that year. Was a really difficult time in terms of that, just, I suppose, the evolving nature of the different symptoms I experienced. So from going just hearing voices or like whispers to full on like seeing things in front of me, and like my patterns of thought were just really like not myself. I was experiencing all sorts of like really, I suppose, out there and really severe mental health symptoms. And at that point, I then started seeing a psychologist at my youth hostel, and she worked alongside the staff on the Maudsley services and the care coordinator I was seeing there to really start developing a full like care plan for me in terms of how I was going to be supported around my mental health issues. So it was around making sure that where I was living was safe for me in terms of the things I was experiencing. My school got involved as well in terms of supporting me. I had like a full support system there. So I had the NHS Maudsley service. I had the key workers and the staff at my youth hostel, as well as my school supporting me. So from all angles, I was being supported. And over the course of that year, I began to seriously improve and really get to the root of the problems that were leading to all those the emerging mental health issues I was going through. And since then, I've been in and out of like therapy and counselling services, whether it's around like bereavement counselling or just general therapy or speaking to a psychologist for different issues that have arisen as a result of like living with anxiety disorder.
Thank you both for sharing your experience. It seems like you both benefit from services, and yes, it seems like there are services, but at the same time, like we Dale share some statistics with me, and I'm gonna share them. So so Black men are more likely to be diagnosed with severe mental health problems. And another one that I saw, Black people are 40% more likely to access treatment through police or criminal route. And Black people are less likely to receive psychological therapy, even though have higher rates. And so another thing that came to my head now that you were mentioning about like the benefit of having a Black therapist, and also like a Black man, I assume. But if already like in the therapy, I can pronounce it, but in the therapy sector, there's less number of male therapists, and we want to add that like the like Black, to be Black, to get a little bit more of relatability. It is a challenge, right? So any of you want to add on this and statistics?
Yeah, so there's a number. Roberto just listed a few of the statistics there, but there's a number of different statistics that you can find in regards to like health inequalities that exist when it comes to Black communities in the UK and their mental health, or how they access mental health services. So one of the key ones was the fact that Black people, particularly Black men, tend to access, are more likely to access, I think it's 40% more likely to access therapy services or mental health services through criminal justice system or through the police route. And we know that's because of like racial discrimination, police bias, and those sort of things, leading to us accessing mental health service in a very particular way. And also alongside that particular statistic is often the fact that we are misdiagnosed with a mental health issue or section when our issues are not necessarily mental health related. So in my previous job, I worked as a mental health peer support worker. So working in Lambeth Hospital on the mental health ward, supporting clients with like readjustment to society. And often what you found were not only I suppose the reasons they were in that space because they had gone through the criminal justice route, but it was also that the space they were in was not appropriate for the needs that they had. So for some of them, it was drug related, but they actually needed to be speaking to a drug counselor or someone like a rehab service. And they were sectioned and what's the word I'm looking for? They were sectioned and put in the restrained and stuff. So there's trauma that's emerging because of that, as opposed to the trauma that they should be addressing. So if you're going to a mental health service, and therefore because of a particular trauma or mental health issue, they haven't got that, but now they've got trauma because of how they've had to interact with the police and interact with the services. So then it's what you find is that often they're in these services for I suppose the wrong reasons, and not actually receiving the correct support for their actual needs. And then you find that because of that, they're actually in and out, they're going back and forth in and out the services where they've left once they've had their 6 weeks or 12 weeks or however long they've been sectioned for. They've left the service, but the initial issue that by they come in contact with these services hasn't been addressed because they're not being, I suppose, supported properly, and end up back in the service for the exact same reasons again. That's a common thing I found, not only in my experience of mental health services, but as working as a peer support worker, I saw that often Black men were not actually being supported in the correct ways for their needs.
And we know that our prison service and the criminal justice system is filled with people, regardless of ethnicity or gender, who have severe or mild mental health problems, and they're either in the criminal justice system because of those issues, which have been misdiagnosed, or they've been exacerbated by being inside of the system as well. So we know that across the board, and if we add on top of that, that Black men are disproportionately inside of the criminal justice system, you can see we have a perfect storm there. I think what Dale and I are also really interested in, which Dale has alluded to, is the reasons why we end up in those systems in the first place, or we end up with severe mental health issues. And I'm old enough to remember a period in the 80s and early 90s where Black men were being overwhelmingly sectioned. I would see it constantly. I mean, I live in Brixton, and I would constantly see Black men with severe mental health issues on the road, ending up in some mental health institution. I would see Black gay men that I knew who may just go down a rabbit hole of drugs one week, and then before you know it, they're in the Maudsley Hospital or Springfield, another institution. So I think that those are the realities, but I think that we can't have this conversation without understanding how we got to where we are. And so, you know, I've spoken things about my own dad's experience, but racial trauma, disconnect from our communities, the taboo of talking about mental health, the daily experience of being a Black person and then a Black man in this country itself is incredibly stressful. If you are constantly on hyper alert because of the fact that you might be stopped by police, or you're going to face some sort of racial inequality at work, or if you raise these things, if you've come from school and you've been put into educationally subnormal group, as it used to be called back in the 70s and 80s, all of these things are going to play a part in bringing you to where you are today. And I think in many ways, Dale and I are quite blessed that we have been through that system, and we are now here to tell the tale, because we were able to start identifying what some of those issues were and starting to address them. And there are so many people in our community who are nowhere near that journey. And that's either because of their own internal denial, or not understanding the situation, or not having the systems and the services in place which are fit for purpose to talk about those issues. So Dale and I were just talking the other day about speaking about how we're raised in our families, and how Black children may come from quite strict families. And when those are things are taken into the therapy room, they're seen as abuse. And so we immediately might switch off. So we're going to talk a little bit, I think Roberto's got some questions around cultural competencies, but unless we're starting to address those really core issues, then therapy just doesn't work. These are the things which bring us into the space in the first place.
Thank you, Marc. Thank you, Dale. Well, I think we went through a little bit of this, but not really in depth. But so talking about like services and access to them, I think we need to talk about the institutions and the impact that systematic and institutional racism has on Black men, particularly Black men. Well, I think you went through a little bit, Dale, but I don't know if you want to add something else.
Yeah, I think what you just said there, the impact of racism and both institutional racism on the individual level, whether it's racial bias, whatever it is, it all funnels, it tends to funnel Black men into, I suppose, mental health services, but at the most extreme level, at the later level, or at the stage in which they're treated as opposed, Black men are treated as an issue as opposed to someone to be supported and cared for. So one example is the fact that Black men are often stereotyped as the aggressive bully or the overbearing, like, aggressive person. So that tends to lead to as I said earlier, going into mental health services with the criminal justice route, where we're perceived as a threat or as dangerous, often being restrained more often than anyone else when it comes to being in hospital, and the like. Oh, my head just gone. Sorry, Marc, take over.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to add into that as well that, you know, I mean, stereotypes and, you know, all of these things which we've had like, you know, years and decades to try to unpick. So at one end, you do have this notion of aggression being, you know, mad, bad and dangerous is the thing that keeps coming back into my head as an identifier for many Black men. But we can make a comparison to Black women in reproductive health services, that Black women are thought to have less likely to experience pain or have a higher pain threshold. And so when we're looking at Black communities around health inequalities, these things are 400 years old. This isn't since we arrived here in the 50s and 60s. We're unpicking centuries of racial bias and stereotyping. So, and then obviously as a community, we internalize those things as well. So many of us who are Black men may think actually the way to tough out bad emotions or sadness or relationship breakdowns is just to tough it out, because we're going to look like wimps, or we're going to look strong in our community. And going to talk to somebody formally seems like something that only a weak person would do. So where does that sit within your community? It's not seen as a strong thing to do. It's not a masculine thing to do. So we use the term toxic masculinity a lot, we throw it around, but I think that as well needs to be unpicked about how that's been put on and how we internalize that. And that prevents us from just engaging at the softer end of talking therapies before we even get to the institutions. And I just want to unpick that little bit about institutional racism and in the services, because it's not just about the impact of institutional racism or systemic racism, it's what happens when we get into those places as well, which Dale has already mentioned about restraints, higher drug dosages, you know, being put in a corner and not having all those things. So the institutions themselves, once they're in there, those also aren't necessarily fit for purpose.
Exactly. And just adding on what Marc was saying there, particularly about Black women, statistically, Black women, when it comes to like the more, I suppose, the more common or lower level mental health issues, Black women are more likely to experience anxiety, depression, and similar related mental health issues as well, because of, again, those similar the words are escaping me, my head's going blurry. Those similar racial injustice and racial discrimination. Again, not also, although women are more likely to go engage with like talking therapies, Black women are also more likely, similar to Black men, access to the services at a much later stages than what Marc was saying there. Rather than going at the entry, we know that those mental health issues can be addressed quite early before they develop into something more serious. Both Black men and Black women tend to experience it when they're already at crisis point, where it's already at that point where they need to, I suppose, go through the medication route or go through the being sectioned.
Thank you. So if before we open up the floor for questions and like comments and stuff like that, I just have one more that like if we talk a little bit more specific and even a little bit more related to what Stillpoint does, which is the consulting room. Do you think like we actually talked already about that, but like the importance of having like another Black man therapist, but actually we went through it. Yes, is cultural competences. Yes,
Competencies.
Yes, I can.
Competencies. Yeah.
But
I mean, I think on that. I think on that, sorry, before we jump in, I mean, whilst I personally would like, you know, to see another Black man in front of me when I'm in therapy, it's not a deal breaker for me, right? I need somebody that can understand my lived experience. And if they don't understand it, they're open to understanding it and they're open to learning about it. And they're willing enough to recognize that their experience, if they're a white European person, for example, their experience of coming from the dominant culture in which I live will shape the way that they see me And how do they disconnect that, right? That will inform, because they will come into the space with unconscious and conscious biases. So it's how do therapists check that at the door? I don't need everybody in the room to understand that what it means to be a Black British man of Jamaican heritage, or if I use particular terms, they're going to understand that. But I step into a therapy space expecting kindness and compassion and understanding. And in the same way that all the therapists I've worked with in the past are neutral, I expect that going forward. If I could just give you one example, I went through quite a serious drug problem in the 2000s, and my clinician recommended I see a psychiatrist at the Chelsea and Westminster Hospital. And while she was very, very lovely, she had absolutely no connection to me as a Black queer man who was using drugs at this time. And she constantly wanted to talk about my relationship to my dad. And that for me was just really off-putting. I mean, that wasn't why I was there. I wanted to talk about the issues which were to do with my relationship at that time. And she was going down a traditional Eurocentric route of going, everything has to do with your dad and your dreams. And I was like, no, I'm out of here. So again, for me, I needed somebody that was just a little bit more understanding and could hold that space.
I think also what Marc's alluding to there is, similar to Marc, I don't necessarily think you need to have a counsellor or therapist or psychologist or whatever professional as someone who's, I suppose, like a carbon copy of your background or your identity, whether that's being Black or as a man or as a queer person. I think it's about the main thing about the person being kind and actually being able to build a rapport with that person. So when you're in that space, you know that it's a safe space, that you're a space that you know you're going to be properly supported. Like Marc, I've had instances where I've been working with a counsellor and they're focused on a completely different thing than what I'm there for. They're focusing on my relationship with my family or what kind of the strict ways in which my parent raised me. I'm like, but that doesn't bother me. I understand that those things might be upsetting for other people that haven't come from that background, or they might be abused or whatever it may be, but that's not what I'm trying to unpack right now. You can unpack that at another time. I'm here to talk about X, Y, and Z. So I think it's about I think the main thing is being able to build that rapport with the person, or if the person is, I suppose, distant from your community or doesn't really understand your background, are they willing to do the work to get to that point? Because that's part of their job, being able to relate to and understand the person they're working with. So I think my best experiences of any sort of mental health support was my care coordinator. She was a white British woman, so she didn't really have anything in relation to me other than we live in the same country, but she actually done the homework, I suppose, to understand what it was like for me as a person of Jamaican descent living in the UK. She actually went away and tried to understand, or if she didn't know where to look, she would say, oh, can we take 5 minutes? Can you just explain to me where I can go and find more things out? So she was actually doing the homework and making sure that when she was supporting me in the hour we had together every 2 weeks, she was dedicating the time to actually supporting me rather than taking notes about what it means to be a Black man or what it means to be a queer man. I think it's about the rapport and doing the homework.
Very important. Well, I think now we are gonna open the floor for the rest of guests. Can be questions, comments. Why are you here? And we have already Jim. Please, if you wanna unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. And hello, everyone. My name's Jim. I'm from the Terence Higgins Trust. I know one or two of you, so good to see you. Thank you to Marc and Dale for sharing your insights and stories. That was very, very interesting. And I'm also I'm kind of interested to get your perspective on just the way things have changed sort of culturally, because a lot of people we talk a lot more about mental health in society now than we used to. It's been interesting just to see how much it's come up, through the Olympics, for example, in the last week or two. And I'm just kind of curious as to how you think that that's sort of playing out in terms of particularly Black men, because, are Black men and younger Black men, perhaps also a question for Dale, more likely to or more willing and able to talk about their feelings perhaps than they used to. And is that, I mean, that is obviously a good thing in itself, but I'm just concerned that when people are now being given permission to talk more about their feelings, you know, in society, but unless we can kind of provide solutions and support around that, then it's actually quite can be counterproductive. And I'm sure that a lot of you know, young people and maybe, you know, young Black gay men. I know you work a lot with young Black gay men, Dale and Marc, but will get support perhaps from each other. But if they're not able to access, you know, the mental health services that they need, then actually does it then sort of create a situation where they sort of, you know, go back into their shell a bit because they're not getting the support that they need? And we know that services don't exist in anything like, you know, the level that they do. So I'm just curious to explore that a bit.
I think there's two things there, and they're going from my head as I'm saying it. But I think one thing is the fact that although I've noticed anyway, is that although there's so much talk now about mental health, and I suppose it's very much in people's face in terms of like understanding that mental health is a thing that's very much as important as physical health. I think there is still a disconnect about how people understand what mental health is, as we've seen with the athletes that have taken breaks from games and stuff. People still view mental health in a very, I suppose, narrow way. So although we're talking more about it, people tend to say, oh, it's only a mental health issue if you're breaking down in tears, or if you're having a psychotic episode, or at the more, I suppose, the more visible extreme level of mental health. That's when people tend to understand and recognize it as a thing. When it comes to, I suppose, anxiety, or I suppose the more invisible levels of mental health issues, people are still tend to be very not compassionate about it. So we saw with I can't remember her name, Simone, the American athlete. A lot of people were, although she received a lot of support, there was a lot of people, I suppose, people criticizing her, saying, well, why she just needs to toughen up and whatever. She's, what's anxiety? She's just pushed through it, that sort of thing. So I think, although we're talking about mental health issues, there's still a lot of education that needs to be done on what it looks like and what it feels to be someone in that position. And the second thing is gone from me.
I mean, I could jump in as well. I mean, thanks, Jim, for that question. I think it's spot on. I think there's a couple of things. You're absolutely right that conversation has ramped up, and I'm really glad to see it's ramped up. I think also, you know, if we look at popular culture, two of our biggest rappers and artists in this country, Stormzy and Dave, have both spoken about their mental health journey on their albums and publicly. You know, Dave's last album, Psychodrama, right, was all about being in a therapy session. So I think amongst younger Black men, there is possibly, I'm not a younger man, right, I'm not in that world, but there is that conversation taking place. And I think that permission has now been given. But I think that Dale is right. It's about then understanding, is it anxiety? Is it psychosis? Is it just depression? Is it just feeling sad? So I think we still need to unpick what that language means and how to present that to people. But Dale is absolutely right. It's all very well identifying that you have a mental health issue. But there are three things that I've noted down which kind of act as barriers for us as Black men. So one is history. Right? We have a long, poor history of engaging with mental health services, or when we do, it's really, really poor or institutionalized. The second one is around trust. So we know, for example, our relationship with the police. We are less likely to call the police, although we are more likely to have a crime perpetuated on us. So we're less likely to call mental health services or engage with those because we're worried that we're going to get sectioned, or you're going to misdiagnose us, or you're going to put us on a load of really heavy drugs. So why bother with it? And then the third one is around cost. Therapy is expensive. It's not cheap. You know, when I was referred to a therapist through the NHS, as I've said, it wasn't the best therapy. And it's not to down NHS therapists, but access and cost is prohibitive for so many people. So even if I know that I'm diagnosed and I've got poor mental health, do I trust the services I'm applying to? And can I afford, either financially or just my time, to go because I might be working, I've got 3 kids, I live on a council estate in Peckham. So I think all of these things become barriers to us, even once we've been diagnosed or even if we've identified there's something wrong.
And just again, just adding to that as well, as I was working throughout the pandemic, I was working as a mental health peer support worker, so last year. And one of the things we saw was that there were so many people get referrals for mental health services, but the mental health services themselves just couldn't cope with the number of referrals. So often when people actually try to engage with those services, the waiting lists are 6 months long, a year long. So many people don't actually receive, although they're willing to actually engage, they're not getting the support when they need it. And if you're going to that service when you're already in that crisis moment, 6 months is not good enough. 6 months is way too late. And it's already too late once you've already engaged with the service if you're in crisis. So there's so many barriers, like Marc was saying, there's so many barriers to actually identifying that you have a mental health problem or issue that needs to be addressed, to being willing to talk about it or receive service. And even when you get to those services, are you going to receive the support in a timely manner? Or when you actually do get the service, is the support appropriate for what you need? Are you going to experience racial bias, or are you going to be sectional? Are you going to experience some sort of criminal justice interaction? So there's many, many barriers throughout the journey of engagement with mental health services.
Thank you, Jim. Anyone else? Any other comment, question?
Oh, Casti got him before me, I think.
Yeah, and go Chaska, please. If you want to unmute yourself or write on the chat, however you prefer.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
First of all, thank you very much, Dale, for inviting me to this. I think listening to everything has been hugely interesting, but then also very stark. I'm 21 years old and I'm at drama school. And regarding mental health services, I've only started in the last few years to have them at drama school, and they've been very, very helpful. But again, I think all the points that were being said about waiting lists and, you know, I think that's something that's very disappointing and something that does need to be changed. What do you think that, and this is open to anyone here, what do you think that the government can do, successive governments can do to improve this? Because we've had COVID, we have so many different factors that are quite often generalized when the whole sort of debate on mental health is being discussed.
Thanks for the question. I think there's a number of things that can be done, and I don't think it's just specific to supporting those mental health services. I think there's so many things around mental health services. As we know, there's many forms of self-care or things you can do before you need to actually engage with therapy services or counselling services. So one big thing I think is lack of youth services or youth centres around in these communities. There's been such a kind of funding of them, so people aren't even able to, when they're going through some certain mental health issues, or they just need an outlet, where it's going to a football ground and playing with your friends to let off steam, or going to a boxing gym. Some of these services have been closed. So where do people find those outlets when they need to let off steam? And a big thing for me, as I was going through my secondary school years, and I was experiencing a lot of those mental health, those mental health issues were, I suppose, there, but I wasn't really aware of them. One of my biggest ways of I suppose, letting that off was going to kickboxing class. And that service is no longer available because that has been closed down. There was a park near where I grew up where me and my friends used to play football. That's been completely paved over. It's like a block of flats now. So a lot of those places where people would normally go and, I suppose, enjoy themselves or let off that stress before they even get to the point of reaching a mental health service are no longer available. So I think that's often why people are then having to go to those mental health services. And even then, mental health services has been cut. So there's not enough counselors or therapists in those spaces. Those spaces that are providing the support aren't big enough to manage the amount of new referrals, just like in general, and let alone during the pandemic where there's so many new referrals coming through. So I think funding is a big thing that needs to be addressed, but not only when it comes to the mental health space, but all the things around it before you reach there.
I think, thank you, Dale. I think, Damien, do you have?
Yeah. So thank you very much for your stories, and I think I got the impression though that in a way you were lucky, and that a lot of Black men coming into contact with services are not going to have your luck. And talking as a therapist, I'm from the University of Westminster, and I'm also a psychotherapist. It's like we've had many years of where we've been told to, or this sort of cultural competence has been advocated. But I wouldn't say that my colleagues have this cultural competence. I wouldn't say that they are aware of the issues that you've been talking about. I think that this would be news to a lot of my colleagues. And I think that in a way, I guess my question is, where do we go to from here? Because a lot of colleagues think that you could just, take a generic approach and that's going to be fine. But you're saying that it isn't fine. And in a way, we kind of need to decolonize the approach. I think it's like, trying to impart this training hasn't worked. We are where we are, but there's systemic racism. It's hidden. It's in regulations. It's in policies. It's almost like we need to kind of, start again, or we need to do something different because that's the impression that I get. You're here because you're lucky, which isn't really good enough, is it? I guess.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it is. I mean, none of this is going to be easy. And I think as we've seen over the past year with COVID and with the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement across the globe, that these are questions and issues that Black and brown communities have been facing for decades, but the wider population are facing them starkly for the very, very first time. And I think what's encouraging for myself, and I think for Dale as well, and other Black men and Black communities, is that we're not going quietly. We are going to keep pushing at this door. And I like what you say, Damien, about decolonizing, and it's going to take a radical approach. I don't think it's about, I am not a fan of unconscious bias training or employing another diversity and inclusion officer. No, you need to go right back to basics and completely understand the practice. But then I think there's another thing, is that therapists aren't just therapists. You do not just come into the therapy room and go, I'm putting on my therapy hat today. You are human beings who exist in the world. And in the same way that you as therapists have gone through sorry, my dog's going a bit crazy in the background. If you can hear him, I apologize. But if you have to do the work on yourselves, right? Before you sit in front of a client or a patient. So within that is going to be you checking yourselves and maybe tearing some of your own biases around race apart before you do that work. So it's tough. It's not going to be easy, in the same way that existing, living, breathing as Black is not easy. And that's why we are in this situation. So if we're doing the work, then if I'm paying you, I expect you to do the work as well.
So I think it is as radical as you say. I think because I mean the colonial project was to withdraw empathy, wasn't it? The whole idea was to be kind of like detached and construct people as having a deficit to impart white knowledge. And this is a whole lot of. I mean, we're really. I guess what I see is a bit of kind of resistance from colleagues who say we don't. No, we don't need to know that. And yet you kind of think, well, we kind of do need to know this. So I don't know. It's almost like we're at the very beginning, that we're at the very beginning of this journey. And so I really appreciate the way that you kind of like brought it alive, really sort of convinced me, brought it alive. This is something that we need to do. Thanks.
I think just to add, well, Marc was saying, I think we do really need to go back to base and at the root of like how mental health services operate and how they run, particularly when it comes to, I suppose, the more institutionalized level, I suppose the community level. When I was doing some work for my project, the Black Health Matters project, I was looking at some of the inequalities within mental health service and how they've been going on for decades back to the colonial era. And one of the things, some of them, I suppose the ways of thinking about how people looked at Black people as being like mentally subhuman and as such have continued now in terms of practice. One of the things was that runaway slaves were mentally ill. Another thing was that people with dreadlocks, like I have, had mental health issues, and that's why they carry themselves in that way. Certain ways of people carry themselves culturally were seen as mental health issues or being subhuman. We saw like some of those ways of thinking and those ways of talking about Black people and our mental health carried over into the 2011 London riots in terms of how the news outlets spoke about our communities and how we operate as communities, whether it's being from single parent families and being because we're from single parent families, we're more prone to violence, that sort of thing. So it's as much as it is about, I suppose, addressing the therapists and counsellors in the room now, in terms of how they operate and what they bring to practice. It's also about, I suppose, the foundations of those services. It's not just about when that therapist is receiving his certificate and his training about to get to his job now. It's about how they actually learn about mental health issues at the very base level, and that university level, college level. It's like I suppose the very DNA of those services is where the issue lies. It's not just at the point in which I go to a therapist and he says he doesn't like me or he doesn't want to engage with me because of my skin color.
And Roberta, can I just jump in real quickly? Just there's the two things I definitely don't want to miss out is, we spoke about the kind of lack of, we've spoken at a really top level and the medium level, so institutions, therapy, but there is also something about what we can do. And I never like to have these conversations and think that we as a Black community are purely at a deficit, right? So we do have things within our communities where we find ways to talk, where we find ways to share and engage. For example, I am blessed to have curated a community of Black men around me that I can turn to. And I'm aware of a campaign a couple of years ago called, I think it was called, I Googled it just now, couldn't find it, called You're Good Man, which was literally Black men tagging each other in social media posts to say, are you good? Are you doing okay? Right? Check me out, contact me, reach out to a brother and connect. So I think that is definitely there. And Dale and I recently came across a project, I think it was up in Sheffield, where a Black woman who's running her own company around mental health had sourced funding to go into mental health institutions with barbers and hairdressers to do the hair of African and African Caribbean people who had been institutionalized, just literally to make them feel a little bit better about themselves, because that service wasn't happening. So I think, again, on the ground, Black communities are finding ways to respond to the mental health crisis that we continue to face. I think Ian's popped something in the chat. Oh, there you go.
Yes,
Yes.
we will post the recording later, but also Laila, did I pronounce it right? Shared a link for Zoom theater performance, and please check the link on the chat. It's called The Review, and which you might might be interesting. So please check the chat and see the play. I was like, we have 5 minutes left, so before that I just want to check if there's any resources or like sites that you, through the work of Black Health Matters, that you came across that you would like to point and that could be helpful, either with statistics or any organizations that are doing like good work that might not be government, but there's also some other initiatives happening. So if you know of something, or even someone else in the room that you want to share.
Yeah, there's a few that I can think of. So the one that Marc was talking about is called Adira, up in Sheffield, where the one that he was talking about in terms of going to mental health spaces and providing hair care treatment for Black communities. There's a few I can think of based in London. So there's one organization called Transform Minds, and they work particularly with Black teenagers around addressing PTSD that they might experience from, whether it's around gang violence or school exclusion, that sort of stuff. So it's trying to support them before they trying to support them around those sort of issues like gang violence and school exclusion and school-based traumas. Another one, and Marc's just put in the chat, is Black Thrive. They do a lot of work around advocating for Black communities in South London, but I think they've recently gone global as well, and they have a much global network now of that kind of advocacy service and support. And they also try to do a lot of work around policy in the communities, to trying to push for funding in the local communities and local services. Another one I can think of is Black Minds Matter UK, and they're a therapy service, particularly for Black people, trying to connect them with Black therapists and stuff. I know they also do. Although you have to pay for that service, they do, depending on your level of need and your financial situation, also subsidize the cost of those services as well. That's the ones off the top of my head.
Great, thank you. And I think we also knew about, well, this is, I don't know if there's anyone in the room that is not UK based, but like, Masha, could you share about like Kemoi, or if there's no drilling, but.
Yeah, so one of the counselors who was associated with Stillpoint Spaces Berlin made like a project or an initiative, and it was Queer Black Therapy Fund. So Kemoi was gathering funds via GoFundMe page that I can share with you later on. And yeah, so 10 people has been invited to get therapy for free. At the moment, it seems like we will be able to provide one session per week, approximately for 6 months or so. The initial idea was for 1 year. So we are still gathering funding, and it will be going on until the end of September. So yeah, perhaps I could just write you about that within the Stillpoint community. And if you think that you would be having someone to share it with, I think it will be valuable. All the time I have like many thoughts, but one of them is that I feel like in Germany, these conversations are happening very rarely. And even though it's probably hard to imagine UK as being advanced in that sense, I would say it is. So we would really benefit from the knowledge you have gathered through the years, and yeah, from the community support that you already have.
Thank you, Masha. Well, it's time. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us. And I will be posting these links in the event comments in the community. Thank you very much, Marc and Dale, for sharing your experiences. Like, I understand how putting yourself through remembering and just like being here is, like, as you said, Marc, is like, it can be stressful and a reminder of all those things. And I really appreciate you taking the time and the energy on this. I'm really happy with the information shared and the knowledge. And thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, everybody. Good to see you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.